phone call lasted 4 seconds. He's gone. 3 words. A pause. Then the reply came from the other end of the line. Well, that's too bad. And it went dead. Outside on the pavement, 13 floors below. A man was dying. His name was Frank Olson. He was a scientist who worked for the United States government. The person who made that call was his CIA colleague. Sitting on the toilet in their shared hotel room less than 20 feet from where Frank had gone through the window, he never moved. He never checked if Frank survived. He just sat there and waited. For more than 20 years, everyone accepted it as a suicide. Then one piece of evidence surfaced that changed everything, because if Frank Olson didn't jump, then someone inside the CIA may have murdered him. Here's what the government told the public. Frank Olson had a mental breakdown. He jumped. Here's what the government didn't tell the public. 9 days earlier, Frank Olson had been secretly drugged by his CIA supervisor, without his knowledge, without his consent. He had just returned from a trip where he witnessed things so disturbing that when he got home, he told his wife 3 words. "I've made a terrible mistake." He never explained what the mistake was. He never got the chance. What Frank Olson had seen, and what made him dangerous, was a program the CIA had been running for years in complete secrecy. A program with no public record, no official budget line, no documentation that the outside world was ever supposed to see. A program that used human beings as test subjects without telling them, that ran experiments in hospitals, in prisons, in universities, and in government-funded brothels, that tried over 20 years to answer a single question. Can a human mind be controlled? This is MKUltra. Not the version in 3-paragraph summaries. The version built from 16,000 pages of financial documents that only survived because one government employee filed them in the wrong building. Before we get to Frank Olson, you need to understand the man who built this program, because everything, the experiments, the cover-up, the death flows from one person. He was born with both feet deformed, required 3 surgeries just to walk, and even then, walked with a noticeable limp. He had a severe stutter. He was rejected from military service after Pearl Harbor because of his disability. His name was Sidney Gottlieb. He held a PhD in biochemistry from Caltech. He spoke 6 languages. He was a folk dancer, a goat farmer, a devoted husband and father, by every account, a deeply spiritual man who believed in peace and service to others. He was also the man who would secretly poison thousands of people and likely murder at least one of them. The CIA found Gottlieb in 1951. They hired him for their technical services staff, a division that built spy gadgets. He became chief of the newly formed chemical division. His superiors noticed he was different from other scientists. He didn't just understand chemistry, he understood how to weaponize it. At this point, the CIA was 4 years old, and absolutely terrified. The Cold War was accelerating. American POWs were appearing on Soviet broadcasts, confessing to crimes they hadn't committed, speaking in flat, robotic tones. CIA analysts watched those recordings and reached a conclusion that shook the entire agency. The Soviets had developed mind control. They had found a way to make people willingly say things they didn't believe, to reprogram a human being. If this was real, and the CIA was convinced it was, then the United States was facing an existential threat. A nation with functional mind control could extract any secret from any captured agent, could turn defectors into sleeper assets, could systematically reprogram civilians. The first country to crack this technology would win the Cold War without firing a shot. The CIA's first attempt, a program called Project Bluebird, and its successor Project Artichoke, was a failure. Electroshock broke subjects but didn't give the CIA control over them. Isolation was unpredictable, hypnosis worked inconsistently. Gottlieb, now running the research, concluded that brute physical methods would never work. The mind was more sophisticated than that. It needed a chemical solution. He experimented with everything available. Mescaline, wildly unpredictable. Heroin, numbing, but not useful. Barbiturates, too sedating. Cocaine made subjects erratic and impossible to direct. Then Gottlieb read a classified army report about a compound developed in Switzerland, a hallucinogen called LSD-25. The report described its effects on the human psyche as unlike anything previously studied. Gottlieb decided to try it himself. He described the experience as enlightening. He became convinced, immediately and completely, that LSD was the tool he'd been looking for. And in the spring of 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles gave him the authority to find out if he was right. He called the program MKUltra. And within months, one of the scientists working around this program would begin telling friends he had seen things that should never have existed. His name was Frank Olson. We'll come back to him. The first operational problem was procurement. In 1953, LSD existed in one place on Earth, a pharmaceutical laboratory in Basel, Switzerland, operated by Sandoz Pharmaceuticals. They had synthesized it in 1938. They were the only manufacturer in the world. And between the CIA and the Soviet Union, both quietly trying to acquire large quantities, Sandoz had reached its limit. They announced they were stopping production entirely. When Gottlieb heard this, he moved the same day. He sent agents to Switzerland with a single instruction: buy everything they have. The entire remaining stock, every gram Sandoz had produced. The price was $240,000 for 10 grams of LSD, an amount that physically is roughly the size of 2 standard sheets of paper. In today's value, over $4 million for something you could hold in the palm of your hand. The CIA had just spent more than most Americans would earn in 20 years. But Gottlieb wasn't satisfied with a one-time purchase. He needed sustainable production. So under MKUltra Subproject 6, he secretly approached Eli Lilly, one of America's largest pharmaceutical companies, with a covert contract. The terms were simple: learn to synthesize LSD from scratch, manufacture it at industrial scale, tell no one who you're working for. Eli Lilly succeeded within months. The CIA now had an unlimited supply. Gottlieb now had the ingredient. What he needed next was a delivery system, and a way to use it on people without those people knowing. MKUltra was organized as 149 separate sub-projects. Each one was run by a different researcher. Most researchers never knew the others existed. Most never knew who was ultimately funding them. The grants were routed through a network of fake foundations with names like the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology and the Geschichter Fund for Medical Research. In total, more than 80 institutions participated: universities, hospitals, prisons, mental institutions. The researchers believed they were conducting legitimate scientific work funded by private philanthropists. In some cases, they may even have believed they were helping people. What they were actually doing was helping the CIA answer a question that no ethical scientist would ever agree to answer. How much can you do to a human mind before it stops functioning as a mind? The answers were documented in a federal facility in Kentucky. 7 patients, most of them young men, received double, triple, and then quadruple doses of LSD every single day for 77 consecutive days. The researchers noted their observations. The patients were not consulted. In the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, 20 prison inmates received LSD nearly every day for 15 months. The agency described these subjects internally as expendables in a juvenile detention center in New Jersey. The same class of experiments was conducted on minors. The subjects in each case were never told what they were being given, never given the option to refuse, never told why. But even these experiments weren't the most dangerous thing MKUltra was doing. Because Gottlieb had reached a new conclusion: people behaved differently when they knew they were being studied. So the next phase required subjects who had absolutely no idea they were part of an experiment. In 1955, the CIA rented an apartment in San Francisco. The address was 225 Chestnut Street in the Telegraph Hill neighborhood. From the street, it looked like a private residence. On the inside, it was a full-scale surveillance installation. Agents fitted the apartment with two-way mirrors throughout, hidden cameras, recording equipment in every room. According to one agent who worked there, the electronics were so densely packed into the walls that if you spilled a glass of water in the wrong place, you'd likely electrocute yourself. Then Gottlieb deployed what CIA records describe as women workers, women hired and paid by the federal government to bring men back to this apartment. For every client they brought in drugged and slept with, they received between $50 and $100. The clients never knew anything. Their drinks were laced with LSD before they were served. CIA agents watched everything from behind the mirrors and took notes. They called the operation Midnight Climax. This was not a rogue experiment conducted by reckless agents without authorization. Midnight Climax was a formally approved CIA sub-project that ran continuously from 1955 to 1966, 11 years. Facilities operated in San Francisco and in New York City simultaneously. The official purpose, stated in CIA documents, was research. The actual finding, documented in CIA operational reports, was that combining pharmaceutical alteration with sexual compromise was one of the most effective methods of secret extraction discovered across all of MKUltra. Internal records also note that the agents running Midnight Climax were not opposed to personally participating in what they were running. Not one of the men who walked into that apartment ever knew what had happened to them. Not one of them ever received an explanation or an apology. Not one agent involved in Midnight Climax was ever charged with a crime. While Midnight Climax was operating in San Francisco, Gottlieb found someone doing something even more extreme in another country entirely. His name was Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron. He was simultaneously the president of the American Psychiatric Association and the Canadian Psychiatric Association. He ran the Department of Psychology at McGill University in Montreal. He was one of the most decorated psychiatrists in the world, and he had a theory. Cameron believed that the human personality, the complete architecture of memories, habits, and beliefs that made a person who they were, could be erased completely and then rebuilt from the ground up, not repaired, replaced. He called the erasure phase depatterning. He called the reconstruction phase psychic driving. The CIA in 1957 began funding his work at Montreal's Allen Memorial Institute through one of its front organizations. Cameron received $69,000 over 7 years. He likely never knew the money came from the CIA. Here's what he did to his patients. People who came to him with depression, with anxiety, with minor psychiatric conditions, people who trusted him. First, he sedated them completely. He put them into drug-induced comas, sometimes for weeks, in at least one documented case, for 3 consecutive months. While they were unconscious, he administered electroconvulsive therapy at 30 to 40 times the clinically recommended power, multiple sessions per day. When patients began to surface from the coma, Cameron moved them to sensory deprivation. Limited food, limited water, darkness, total silence. Then he placed a helmet over their heads, fitted with speakers pressed against their ears, and he played tape loops, the same recorded phrase running 16 hours a day, 6 to 7 days without stopping. "My mother hates me. I'm worthless." Negative statements followed by positive replacement statements, designed to install new beliefs. A single message could repeat up to 500,000 times. Patients who completed this process did not recover. They regressed. They emerged unable to walk without assistance, unable to feed themselves, unable to recognize their own children, unable to remember their name or their history or anything that had happened to them before they walked through Cameron's door. They had come in with depression. They left as something closer to infants. And in 2025, 68 years later, survivors and their families filed a class action lawsuit in Quebec Superior Court against the Canadian government, against McGill University, against Royal Victoria Hospital. 68 years, and they are still waiting for someone to use the word sorry in a court of law. They have not heard it yet. Yet somehow, even after everything Cameron did, he was not the person investigators would spend decades trying to understand. That distinction belonged to Sidney Gottlieb, and to a scientist lying dead on a New York sidewalk. By the early 1960s, the CIA had spent millions of dollars trying to answer a single question: could LSD control human behavior? The answer was becoming increasingly clear. No. The agency's own internal reviews were beginning to show the same pattern again and again. LSD could confuse people. It could frighten them. It could make them paranoid. It could destabilize their sense of reality. But controlling them was something entirely different. A frightened subject was not a controllable subject. A confused subject was not a programmable subject. The more data MKUltra collected, the harder it became to justify the program's original promise. After nearly a decade of experiments, the CIA still had no reliable method for controlling a human mind. The central theory behind MKUltra was beginning to collapse. Yet the experiments continued, the funding continued, and the human testing continued, because by that point, too much time, too much money, and too many careers had become attached to the idea that success was just one breakthrough away. But for one CIA-connected scientist, the consequences of those experiments had already begun. His name was Frank Olson, and his story was about to become the most controversial death in the history of MKUltra. Before investigators could ever learn exactly what happened to Frank Olson, another problem emerged. The evidence itself was disappearing. By 1963, MKUltra's own internal review had concluded 4 things, all of which were documented. The program was unethical, it was illegal, it was contrary to the rights of the American people, and revealing its existence would cause untold damage to the CIA's reputation. Gottlieb accepted the review. He let the program wind down, quietly. Sub-projects weren't renewed. The experiments faded. Then, in 1972, Watergate happened. Nixon's operatives were caught breaking into the Democratic National Committee, using surveillance equipment that had been supplied, incidentally, by Gottlieb's own technical services division. The congressional investigations that followed threatened to pull apart every operation the CIA had ever run. The CIA's director, Richard Helms, understood exactly what was coming. On his last day in office, he gave Gottlieb a single instruction: destroy everything. In the weeks that followed, Gottlieb did exactly that, file after file, document after document, 20 years of records, the experiments, the subjects, the results, the communications, incinerated the most complete account of what the United States government had done to its own citizens, systematically turned to ash, except for one thing. Gottlieb had not personally managed every piece of paperwork. A set of financial records, budget reports, payment authorizations, invoices had been sent to a CIA record center. Not the classified operational archive, a budget and fiscal office. The administrative section where nobody looked for intelligence secrets. Those files were never destroyed. In 1977, a researcher named John Marks submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for any surviving MKUltra documents. The CIA searched its classified archive, found nothing, declared the record destroyed, but one employee decided to check the budget section. He found over 16,000 pages. The files contained no experimental details, but they contained names, institutions, payments, subproject numbers. They were enough to prove that 149 separate subprojects had existed, that over 80 institutions had been involved, that this was not a rogue experiment by a few reckless scientists. This was a program organized, funded, and approved at the highest levels of the United States government. CIA Director Admiral Stansfield Turner went before the United States Senate and placed those documents on the record. He acknowledged that the CIA had conducted covert human experimentation for 2 decades, that it had done so on unwitting subjects, that the files had been deliberately destroyed. The Senate held its hearings, the public learned the broad outlines of what had happened. The documents proved MKUltra existed. They proved thousands of people had been experimented on. They proved the CIA destroyed the evidence. But they still didn't answer the question that started this story. What really happened to Frank Olson? Frank Olson's son Eric was 9 years old when his father fell from the hotel window. He was told his father had either fallen or jumped. Those 2 words, fell or jumped, would stay with him for decades. They meant completely different things. And despite being 9 years old, he had a feeling that neither one was true. In 1975, a newspaper confirmed for the first time that the Army scientist who died in a New York hotel in 1953 had been given LSD without his consent by the CIA. President Gerald Ford personally apologized to the Olson family in the Oval Office. The government offered a settlement of $750,000 in exchange for a promise not to pursue legal action. After some consideration, the family accepted. Eric Olson accepted the money. He did not accept the story. He spent the next 2 decades quietly investigating. And in 1994, after his mother passed away, he made a decision that took a particular kind of resolve. He had his father's body exhumed. He hired a forensic pathologist who spent a month examining the remains. The findings were specific. Frank Olson's face and neck had no glass shards. None. If he had dived headfirst through a closed hotel window, which is what jumping through a window requires, his face would have been lacerated. It was clean, and the portion of his skull above his left eye was fractured, not from the impact with the pavement. The fracture pattern indicated a strike before the fall. Someone had hit Frank Olson in the head before he went through that window. 3 years after the exhumation, in 1997, the CIA declassified a document written in 1953. The same year Frank Olson died. The title was A Study of Assassination. The document was unsigned, but Sidney Gottlieb was later identified as its author. The document described the most effective method of killing someone in a way that would be difficult to identify as murder. Step 1, render the victim unconscious. Strike them on the side of the head, the temple, leave no visible wound. Step 2, drop the body from a height of no less than 75 feet to Eric Olson. Reading that document, it was not a coincidence. It was a manual, and his father was the proof of concept. In 1999, the New York District Attorney opened a criminal investigation into Sidney Gottlieb for the murder of Frank Olson. Gottlieb was 80 years old. He had spent his retirement as a volunteer in hospice care. He raised goats on a farm in rural Virginia. He had lived quietly and comfortably for 26 years since leaving the CIA. He had given speeches about the importance of peace. He died before the investigation could reach him. His wife declined to state the cause of death. His body was cremated. Eric Olson has said publicly what he believes, that Sidney Gottlieb died by his own hand, that he chose death over testimony, that he took everything he knew with him. Of the thousands of people who were subjected to MKUltra's experiments across 20 years and 80 institutions, not one received justice through a criminal court. Sidney Gottlieb, retired peacefully, died at the age of 80. Richard Helms, who ordered the destruction of all records, convicted of lying to Congress about a separate matter. He received a suspended sentence and a $2,000 fine. He was never charged for MKUltra. Donald Cameron, the Montreal psychiatrist who put patients into comas and played tape loops into their ears for months, died in 1967, was never investigated. George Hunter White, who ran the government-funded brothel for 11 years, died in 1975. Natural causes. Total criminal prosecutions specifically for MKUltra, 0. The program was formally acknowledged, formally apologized for, and formally closed. But in 2025, 72 years after MKUltra began, survivors in Montreal were still in a courtroom, still in litigation, still waiting for someone with actual authority to say the words that no government has ever been willing to say in front of a judge. We did this to you. We are sorry. Frank Olson's son Eric is still alive. He has spent most of his life asking one question. Frank Olson died in 1953. More than 70 years later, no one has ever been convicted for what happened to him. The records were destroyed. The witnesses are gone. The architect of the program was cremated, and the man at the center of the mystery took most of the answers with him. Which means the final verdict on MKUltra is the same today, as it was the day Frank Olson went through that hotel window. We know far more than the CIA ever wanted us to know, and far less than we need to know. Because the most important witness in the entire story hit the pavement outside a New York hotel window in 1953, and he never got the chance to speak again.